Hey guys, so question came up over the hardware that holds the carrier to the carriage. And I was going to try and explain this in an email, but it would have got incredibly convoluted. So what I'm going to do is use what we have here for the reliability platform that we have disassembled. And I'm going to try and explain kind of what's going on, and hopefully that takes and puts some clarity in the situation. So when we had to change the rail, there is one thing about the entire assembly that did come up. I know that Axe and I talked about it too, and the fact that all of the hardware is pretty much SAE, standard hardware, with the exception of the carriage. So we get the carriage this way, and it already has these M8 tapped holes in it. So we just studded it with M8 studs. Now, we had to modify it, right, because the carriage is physically wider, and that was the reason for these slots. So one of the things that has to happen is we use an M8 nut to space up, to put a space between this right here as far as the riser goes and the bottom of the carriage, so it clears this width and also clears the upper limit stop. So what we found when we put it together was, when I put the standard nuts on here, if you look over on this side, and this is the bottom side of what would be a carrier, you can see where we slotted it, but you also see these stiffeners. Now see how close the outside of this is to this stiffener? Well, this is what we ran into. If I put the standard size nut in there, which was, it's actually a special nut, what would happen is it actually sits and hits on the top of this stiffener like this. So if I go to the standard 12mm nut, which is this one, it's an M8, but it takes a 12mm wrench. Then if I align them, then it fits just perfectly right between these edges without a problem. Now that's what this has on it that's holding them down. And if you look, you can see the flats are all tightened in such a way that they are aligned. So when you set the carrier on there, it fits cleanly right beside them. Again, if I was to use the larger style nut, then it would hit on the stiffeners and wouldn't set all the way flush. So again, this was a 12mm nut. You'd use a 12mm wrench, and it's one of those things where, again, we only want them to use one wrench, a 1/2 inch wrench. That's how all of the step mounts are put together, so on and so forth. So what do they make? They make an M8 tapped nut, but it's made for a 1/2 inch wrench, just like this. So these nuts are the ones that are actually used to hold the carrier on. Now, here is the standard 12mm nut, and you can see it's pretty loose. However, you can still put them on and take them off with the 1/2 inch wrench. At least this 1/2 inch wrench that I have in my hand. Other 1/2 inch wrenches tolerance differently, maybe not. But I can actually use this wrench either on the open end or the box end, and even though it's kind of sloppy, it will actually loosen and tighten these. But that's neither here nor there for this part of the conversation. For the lift that Shalise and Jeff received, it should not have the smaller dimension nuts holding the carrier on. If that actually took place, that was a mistake on my part, and they should have been the M8s that were actually designed for a 1/2 inch wrench. It definitely could have been something I overlooked when I was putting it together, or what might have happened, I might have got the nuts switched up when I had taken it apart and put it back together, and then when I got the fastening nuts for the carriage, because I do believe when we shipped it with the nuts actually on top, already installed here on the riser, but I'm not entirely sure. I don't remember. But that's probably what you're seeing, and we can easily just, ship Shalise and Jeff, 8 of these half-inch special nuts to take and replace the one she has. So it's not an issue, and then we'll definitely make note of it that any of the ones we ship in the future won't have this issue. So as I said, for me to take and try and explain this in an email, I think is pretty difficult. So we just shoot this video real quick and we'll get it uploaded. So hopefully this explains it, and apologies for any grief and aggravation confusion might have caused as Shalise was changing out things, putting the winch on, switching out the carrier, things like that. So let us know if you have any questions, but I hope that explains it. Thanks.